called Drawing Inspiration. So I host a podcast called Drawing Inspiration, and I interview artists. I just released episode 100 earlier this week. And so I interview artists, understanding their journey, why they do what they do, how they do what they do. And it was kind of a learning experience for me. And I decided to share it with everyone through a podcast. So I've been doing that for 4 years. And I have a full-time job in health research. So I'm not a full-time artist. I do this in my spare time. I work in tech around health research. And so I do this in evenings and weekends, and try to find kind of, as I say, the nooks and crannies of my life to be able to fit this in. And I am retiring in a few years, and I am hopeful that I can make this my full-time gig after that, whatever that ends up being. So I appreciate everyone who's here. And I'm going to kind of go through some textures. I'm going to keep it really loose. It was a little bit short notice in doing this, but I absolutely agreed to do it. I'm going to be doing a larger few things this fall. I don't know if I should mention those now, Bethan, maybe?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to be speaking at Wild Wonder, which is the big conference in September. So I'm going to be doing a workshop there, a 90-minute workshop on mastering graphite. And so you'll learn more about that as the tickets go on sale. So I'm really looking forward to that experience. And I'm also doing a probably 7 or 8 week course on drawing in probably October. I think we're releasing that with Etcher. And so I'm going to be doing a much more involved course then. So I was trying to think about, for 45 minutes or so, what can I cover? So I've put together a page that provides you with some images I've taken, and I will so you're free to use them. We're not going to do every image, and we're not going to do a complete version of every image. And you can download them. I see somebody asking, you can download the image. That provides you a more that's Bethan replying to everyone. You can download the image, and that gives you a bit more detail. But when I start drawing, I'm going to have the image on the screen with me. So you don't necessarily need to download, and you can download these and explore them later. The reason I chose these ones is they all have interesting textures. And while you may never come face to face with an elephant or a snapping turtle, being able to render those kind of textures may help you in whatever you choose and whatever inspires you. And so this is really just going to be me drawing, you drawing along. We'll focus on maybe 15 minutes per image. And if there's questions, I'll take on the questions. I'll talk about the tools and the techniques, and we're just going to be kind of drawing together. And I think you posted, yeah, it's in the chat. And I'll have the URLs on top. So once I'm spotlighted, you'll see it that way as well. And it will, as I say, it will be beside me as we're drawing, as we're working through this. So before I get into kind of drawing this out, I don't know if you saw my Instagram story. Do you want to know the story about the duck house behind me in my Instagram story and why it's funny?
Please tell the story.
So it's very quick. We have a pond out back that I've been curating for years. I've got 5 duck houses around the pond, and we have ducks, migratory ducks, that come and nest there. So we've already had almost 40 ducklings emerge. And so the crazy thing is, they're wood ducks and mergansers, and they launch themselves out of the house a day after they're born, and then they disappear in the woods and we never see them. So if we miss it, we miss it. But we caught both this year. But we always watch them to make sure no ducklings get left behind. And so I always put my phone in, maybe you see where this is going, to take a picture to see if there's ducks in there and who's in the house. And we don't do it on a regular basis, but to kind of keep track. And the wood ducks tend not to like it so much. So I did it. This wood duck launches up, hits my phone launches into the pond. And so luckily I have a current iPhone 13 Pro, which is waterproof, but it didn't kind of take away, or it didn't ease my pain when I had to step into 3 feet of muck and reach down to dig for about 2 minutes to try and find the phone. And just an FYI, leather does not repel the pond smell, so I had to get a new case. So that's my story about the duck house.
That's wild, Mike.
So I'm going to go through, and I'll switch my view now to overhead, and I'm going to talk about some of the tools that I'm using. If you don't have all the tools, it's absolutely okay. When I'm going out and I'm sketching or drawing, I have a fairly big kit that I carry with me, and I bring it to work, and I go out and draw and paint at lunch at work. And if you watch my YouTube, I will be sharing an overview of this kit that I use. I won't go through it now, but I like to have all my pieces with me. And I know a lot of people just carry a book and a pencil and that, and I'm just not that person. So I'm going to speak to the fact that we're going to do this simply, but I'm going to talk about a various number of tools before we get into this. Okay. So this is so I'd like to use a few sketchbooks. I think we all have this problem. We always have a few sketchbooks, right? So this sketchbook is an etcher sketchbook with hot press paper. And so that gives it a much smoother texture than the cold press. I do use cold press as well. This is the A5 size. So this is kind of the in-between size. So that's an A6 and this is an A5. I don't usually draw when I go out at work and things like that. I usually bring my A6 because it fits into my little other, my toolkit. But I thought the A6 would be better for the purpose of this demonstration. So that's my chosen book. I do a lot of graphite work in my moleskin. So that's my moleskin book. And I like the moleskin because the paper is off-white and it's very small, very soft. So it has very little tooth, which presents challenges, but it's really nice to draw with pencil. And so I tend to, when I'm doing pencil work, I tend to do it in this book. I do pencil and ink in here. And this is my kind of preferred book to do my little sketches in. And so I know that seems crazy that I have a separate book for pencil, but I do pencil work in here. If you've seen my bullfrog course, that's the bullfrog from the course. So that's the sketchbook. I use a Graph Gear 0.3 millimeter with 2B lead. And I like 2B because it provides me the flexibility to go light and dark. I don't like switching out pencils. I used to use like 4 or 5 pencils from 2H up to 4B, 6B. But I prefer this. And the reason I like this is because I'm bringing it to work. I don't have to sharpen it. And so that's why I switched to mechanical pencils. And I like 0.3 because it's a nice sharp lead. And then when I take out one of these blenders, I can achieve a much wider look to it. Now I also have a 0.5. Now this 0.5, I put this little band on it there. That's to remind me because you can't see the type of lead on these little tiny leads, but this is a 4B lead. You can't get 4B in 0.3 millimeter. You can only get in 5. And I rarely use this, but I just carry it around with me. So 4B will give you a much darker graphite, obviously. And then I do like this Orange Nero, which is by Pentel as well. I'm a Pentel ambassador for Pentel Canada. And I like the Orange Nero. It just feels really nice. But it's got this auto kind of ejecting lead, which I get a little bit frustrated with it. And when you want to close it, you kind of have to push the top and then push it down on the paper. And I don't like that. I prefer the Graph Gear because I can just engage it and then pull it away. Now, the other pencil I'm going to use is a 2 millimeter mechanical pencil. I used to use these when I was in drafting school or mechanical engineering when I was doing drafting. And I really like these when you need to put down a lot of graphite. And once again, these are both, actually, I shouldn't say that. This is 4B and this is 2B. But these you can get up to 8B if you want to replace these leads. So if you like these pencils, they're great. I stopped using these because I couldn't sharpen them. And I know this is a bit of we'll get to the drawing shortly, but I found this brilliant little piece. And so normally you have to sharpen the 2 millimeters with something like this. And that's just an accident waiting to happen with all the graphite. And so I found these, which are fantastic. So it's an eraser, but if you pull the top off, you can sharpen your, you can't really see it there, but you can sharpen your 2 millimeter pencil with that. So this is an easy way for it to be mobile. So I'm always thinking about what can I take with me and what's not going to make a mess in my little satchel. So I got some graphite on my paper. That's fine. We're going to do a lot more of that. So as a matter of erasing, So I talked about these little smudgers or tortillons, or I don't even know how to pronounce them, but I'm going to be using some of these to spread some of the graphite around. I use blue tack. I have an eraser here. I use the mono, but I rarely use that. I prefer to use the blue tack. The advantage with using something like blue tack or a kneadable eraser is just fine, is that you're lifting the graphite off and you're not going to be destroying that that tooth on the paper. So whether you're dabbing or you're dragging, you can make it sharp if you choose to, or you can make it fairly blunt. But I always have one of these, and I usually have it in my hand. I have it warm and ready so that I can deploy it when I need it. And I have these Q-tips I bought, I think at Michael's. And these are just kind of crafty things, but you can just use normal Q-tips. I don't use these as much on small pieces. Like I don't think I've used a Q-tip drawing for about 3 or 4 years, but I do have them here because, as artists, we're also collectors, right? The other thing I may explore with you, but it's not really something you would do in the field, and that is using graphite powder. Never take this with you. You don't want to inhale it accidentally. It can become such a mess so quickly. And I actually have it off the corner of my desk here away from me because I know I'm going to hit it with my hand. The lid is on. But that's another way for you to throw down, because sometimes the textures you're trying to achieve are really light. And by throwing graphite down beside the image, you're going to be able to make that image pop out or pop in, depending on, so you're adding a background to it. Okay, so all that being said, for the paper that you want to, like, you can use whatever paper you want. I would not recommend cold press because you're going to struggle with it. The other thing that I may explore later, I don't know if anyone uses indenting tools, but that's an interesting way to achieve texture. So we'll talk about that later. And if you choose to use wooden pencils, I would recommend either the Mars Lumograph or the Pit Graphite Matte, because once you get into something like the 4B, the 6B, there's less sheen. And so you're not going to see that difference because they're mixing charcoal in. You're not going to see that that kind of shine that you get normally with rubbing like a 4B or 2B. And I know a lot of us, when I first started, for example, I wanted to use 2H most of the time as a starting pencil. And while it's light, it's easy to leave a mark on the paper. So it also almost sometimes serves as an indenting tool if you push too hard with a 2H lead. So I would recommend, if you can, to move to something like a 2B, which gives you more flexibility, and you just have to adjust the level of the pressure that you want to apply there. So I thought we would start maybe with the milkweed picture, because I think that's a little bit of a simpler one. And then people can post in the chat about, I mean, you can go to the site, there's 8 images there. I'll let you choose what you want to do next. But the interesting thing about the morels, or sorry, the milkweed is it's a fairly straightforward texture. There's some shadowing going on there. We can talk through that a little bit. The morel is interesting because we're going to do some negative drawing with that. So that's going to be kind of fun. I love the snapping turtle, but we may not do that. We'll see. I do want to explore the eagle, the golden eagle. I think it's an immature bald eagle. And we can, there's some texture around there with the feathers, but I also want to, what I think is fun is that you've got the beak, which is kind of a different texture than the feathers, but also that reflection on the eye. So texture is not simply about how it looks and feels, but how it reflects light, and being able to achieve kind of a glassy look on an eye. I thought that would be a good eye to choose. And these are all my images, so feel free to use them. I made sure I didn't use someone else's work. We could also do the fiddleheads as well, which are the young ferns. And that's another way to draw negatively. So when we draw negatively, we're drawing the shadows around the objects rather than the objects themselves. Okay, so let's get into this. So, get my glasses on. Okay, so I've already got some graphite on the paper here, and let me know if you can't see or you can't hear. We'll try, I said the milkweed first, right? Okay, so I'll move this over. Okay, and so I'm going to talk through as I draw. So this will be not just an experience in textures, but maybe an experience in how somebody else draws. And it's not to say that my way of drawing is better than anyone else's. This is the way I do it. And maybe you'll learn something from it. That would be great. So when I'm drawing something like this, and maybe I'll try and do this up in a corner a little bit. But once again, we're not going to finish this. We're just going to play with it a little bit. When I'm drawing something like a milkweed, I'm going to be trying to get a rough idea of kind of the overall shape, right? So maybe I want to do something, and I'm not worried about the little prickly bits on the sides yet. So I'm just really lightly with my pencil, just making sure that you can see that, is I'm trying to kind of define this, this milkweed pod. And this is from last fall. This is outside of our house. And I know that this leading edge here is seeing all the light. So I'm okay with going a little bit darker because this is 2B lead. I can lift that off easily later on with my blue tack. And the interesting thing about the milkweed is it kind of does this beautiful kind of connection here. And I don't know the scientific terms, but it's got a nice little handle that kind of leads up like this. And so I'm just going to kind of roll that in here. And then I'm going to think about these lines, because the advantage with kind of any texture, any shape, is that if you obey the lines, it will indicate to people that this is bulging, that this has mass that is moving towards the viewpoint of the user. So if you just did kind of straight lines, you don't get a sense of shape. And so if we think about these kind of being lines that kind of bulge a little bit, it helps for us to understand, and this is where texture is going to be fantastic, is helps us to understand that there's some shape to this that moves not just in the dimension XY here, but in the Z, so it comes towards us too. Now, if I was drawing an animal, my first inclination is to work on the eyes, but since this has no eyes, I'm going to work on the darkest parts first. And the other thing I want to highlight here is, and maybe I'll do this as I'm drawing, is I'm going to focus first on trying to establish my darkest darks. So for me, I'm feeling that there's a really thin dark line across the top here. And I'm going to ignore the little spikes, but I'm going to come down and I'm going to just continue on with the dark. And what I wanted to say is that a lot of people, especially nature journalists, are using ink and they're using watercolor. And I think that's fantastic. I do it all the time. The advantage, and I just interviewed Roseanne Hansen, who's running a few of the Wild Wonder conferences. And I was talking to her about this, that one of the advantages I think in drawing in pencil is it teaches you value. You only have one tool and one color, and you have to really think about value. And I think when I started drawing aggressively and then started going to watercolor, it made sense to me when I was doing watercolor how I can use value to provide dimension. And so I think when you focus time on pencil, it kind of teaches you that and kind of highlights the lights and the darks for you. So I'm going to come down here and I'm trying to be mindful that it is a little bit grayer at the top. So I'm going to do that. And if I feel that I've gone too gray here, I can just go in with my blue tack and I can just do that and lift it right off. And I'll show you, I'll go down the side here. I'm just going to remove some of that pencil. You can see it's just brilliant. And then you just simply roll it back and I have it nice and warm here to use again. And I can go now, and if I wanted to, and add some of these little spikes. And typically when you do these spikes, you want to draw away from the item, the object, because if you come in from the top, you end up being a little bit too fat on it. And so if you can come out like this, you can lift your pencil and it looks more like a spike. If you go the other way around, it can look a little bit odd. And we're going to do a little bit of, we're mindful of that there are some kind of white elements here. And I will typically draw around them. If you feel that you need to define that, maybe I'll try and move this a little bit closer. If you feel like you need to define a round object, like if you need to, I'm just going to do something separate up here. If you need to define that round bit such that it stands out, that's absolutely fine. I think that if you are defining, let's say, areas that you know are going to be round, and I do this on the bullfrog, it's okay to do that, but you want to do it lightly, because if you don't do it light enough, then you're going to see those lines later on. But I can easily go in and, for the purpose of, let's say this is some kind of white item, I can go in and then just quickly add that, come in with the blender, soften it up a little bit, soften the bottom edge, and then don't worry about the sharp edges until later. And I can come in and then I can say, okay, there's a definite bottom edge to this. And I can come in with that. I think what I see a lot of people doing when it comes to graphite, there are two big things. One is go darker. Like a lot of people are just really, really light, and it's okay to come in light. I always come in light, but push the darks. That's how you achieve the texture, is push the darks. And so if you're only using an HB pencil, you're not going to get the darks you want. You need at minimum to use a 2B to try and get the darks you can. You can do things like, if you've got a fixative, you can apply fixative and do HB on HB, and that will get you darker. But that's, I feel like that's a little bit too much effort. So working with a 2B lead of whatever pencil is fine. And I can switch if I wanted to then to a one of these 2mm, and now I can go much easier if I wanted to and bring in even more kind of pencil. And instead of holding it this way now, I'm holding it overhand, and that allows me to drop the angle down, and I've given myself a lot of lead here. So I can quickly go in. If I wanted to, and you're going to really enjoy Roseanne's homework in the podcast, if I wanted to do something quickly, this is how I would do it. I would be roughing in real shapes using something like a 2mm, because I can quickly go in. And if I wanted to, let's say, even think about where is this going to be, because sometimes having this kind of measurement it's helpful to have something beside it to get a sense of how big are we going to go. If if we've got the stem that kind of goes down like this, then I want to understand kind of where this bottom bit comes out. If this is the stem going down, and I'm not going to really focus much on this side of it, but just to show you that you can quickly go through and just kind of define things really easily with a pencil like this. And then you can come back later and just refine it a bit more with either that or with the 3mm or 0.3mm. So I'm going to add some more spiky bits. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time here. I kind of went on a little bit there at the beginning. We should have been drawing. So I'm mindful that, there's kind of a few channels in here. So I'm trying to define where those channels are. And you don't want to do a really deep center line, because it's not really that way, right? It's kind of, if we were to look at this, it's not a valley like that. If we're looking at it from an angle, it's more like this. So when we're drawing this line, we want it to be a bit loose, and we want it to kind of soften up the edges. We don't want it to be a tight single line like this. It should be a much wider line and fading out. So when I'm doing these, it's okay to go a little bit darker in the middle, but I'm going to use my pencil and just be really light and add some of the edges around this, soften the edges, I mean. And if there are any questions, go ahead and ask. I don't know if Beth or
We
Corinne
do have a question, Mike. Someone
Sure.
was asking how you prevent smudging.
I start in the top left. So there's a couple things I do. I do have I don't have it with me because it's in my sketchbook. Here it is. So I always carry an extra piece of paper. So I will tend to just lay the paper here and rest my hand on it. When I finish a piece in a sketchbook, I will spray it so it doesn't transfer. And the other thing I'll do sometimes too is if I'm doing it like something in the Etchr sketchbook has really thick paper, which is great. Sometimes it's not so thick, and I will actually put the paper on the back side because I don't want the impression going through to this next page. Sometimes I use both sides of the page. Sometimes I just use one, but there's no real trick except I'm always mindful where my hand is, and I try and start from the top left to move down. If you're left-handed, you always say the other direction. There's no real tricks around it. And then, you know, you can go through with your blue tack and you can just roll it on the paper and lift some of that graphite that you see on the surface that you didn't mean to put there.
We're wondering what kind of fixative spray you use, because some of them are quite toxic. Do you have to do them? Do you have to spray it outside?
Yes. Yeah. There's no like I'm all for something that's non-toxic and kinder to the environment, but I use the Krylon. I think it's Krylon fixative spray. And yes, I have to do that in the garage, which is a real problem when it's -30 in Canada. But I do. Yes, you do have to do that outside and be very careful about it. So what I sometimes will do is I'll do 2 or 3 drawings, and then I'll just go spray one and then let it sit for a bit and then spray the other one because it dries fairly quickly. And so this isn't a complex piece to work on as a matter of dealing with the textures, but I thought it would be kind of a good start to kind of get us using a pencil and a nice stretch. Yes, the Krylon stuff is nasty. So I'm just, and you can see that maybe you can't see, but this paper itself has a bit of a tooth to it that I'm trying to fill, but I'm really not trying that hard to fill. If I went with something like, this is a fun little book. This is Moleskin, has these little things, and they're really tiny, but the paper is, it's the problem with the paper is it falls off easily, but these are really kind of beautiful, tiny little sketchbooks that you can take and you can just peel the pages off. It takes graphite fairly well, but the paper is really, really super thin. Not a big fan, but they are pretty nice and tidy. And you don't get that kind of tooth effect that you have here. I like it, but some people find it a bit more worrisome. So what I'm doing here is there's a couple of spikes that are white. So I'm trying to actually draw around them. And this you could consider negative drawing, where I'm trying to highlight the spikes such that when I come in and fill around them, they will. And see, I didn't go wide enough there. So sometimes when I'm doing this whole thing where you're doing kind of these circles and you're going to fill in around them, sometimes I tend to draw them way small. I think I'm drawing for the inside or for the outside, but anyways, it's better to go a little bit bigger if you can. And then with these little spikes, I can add kind of those little bottom edges around them. I feel like I went too dark there, so I'm just going to come in with my blue tack and just lift off the graphite. There we go. Let's take one of these down. And the thing with depth and texture as well, because you know they're related, is understanding that you know this is a really dark edge up here, right? And so we want to make sure that we get that nice and dark. But
Mike, do you think it would be possible to zoom your camera a little closer?
Yes, I can do that. One sec, I'm going to do it.
So we can see the fine detail of what you're working on.
Sure. We do it this way.
And now we just need to.
Yeah, maybe I'll just move it down.
Yeah, perfect. Oh, and if you, yeah, that's the way.
Okay.
Someone's asking, to get the texture on the pod, do you draw little squares and irregular shapes? I guess that's all the fine, messy detail of
it. It depends on the level of detail you want to do. In this, I don't think I would do that as much. I would focus kind of on these valleys going down. And then for the valleys, I would, in between them, I would probably just add a little bit of texture like I'm doing there, you know, kind of going X and Y, up and down. And that just gives you a little bit more of a texture on the sides. In retrospect, maybe I should have set up a second camera or third camera pointing sideways here next time. And I'm just moving quickly down to this. I talk about this in the podcast a lot. When I'm drawing, I'm tending to, even though I'm drawing here, I may be looking up here. And then, so when I'm jumping around, it's because I'm addressing something that it's like, oh, I should define that a little bit more.
There's a question about a product Schminke has, which is like a watercolor graphite. Do you ever use a fluid graphite layer?
I haven't, but I've used water soluble graphite. But I've used that with like if I'm doing fountain pen work or ink work, and I just want to add a value or knock down the white of the paper, I will use that. But I tend not to use that stuff. So I've got this loaded up with graphite already. So I'm using this smudger to kind of, I just want to knock this white down a little bit in here. And I can always come back in and pop it up again. So I'm going to put a little knife edge here on my blue tack, and I can drag it up between those lines I just made and just bring back the white a little bit. So I'm mindful of the time, and so we'll spend a little minute or two more on this, and then leave you to play with that if you choose to. And if you wanted to come in with an eraser to pull up some of the white bits, you can always do that if you wanted to, but it's so hard when you get this darker to do that, but you can. Sometimes you have to erase a much larger area and then redefine it. Really like drawing because your medium doesn't dry, or if you're an oil painter, it doesn't stay wet, so you can just do it and then drop your pencil and do something else and then come back to it. Okay, so maybe I'll leave that like that, and you can continue on if you choose to. If you decide to post it or share it, just tag me, and I'd love to see your work. This goes for anything that we're going to cover today. And maybe what we'll do is maybe let's try the eagle, unless we have any other takers here as a matter of subjects. There's a bit of a shadow here, so it's not graphite. Okay. And it's so funny. I don't know if you're like this, but I prefer the birds facing the other way. But because I'm right-handed, I would rather start at the beak here and then move this way. But sadly, that's not the case here. So for this, what I'm going to really want to focus on for the purpose of this exercise is I want to define the head, define the beak, and we're going to play a bit with the texture of the beak, and then we're going to play a bit with the eye. And I'm not going to worry too much about the rest of the feathers. So I'm just going to put the head right here beside the other object. And maybe what I'll do is I'm going to use the 2mm here just so you can maybe see it. I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive with the graphite just because I feel like that would be easier for you to see. And I'm not too worried about the composition here. I'm going to use the head as a sense of the proportion for everything else. I know some people like to draw triangles and circles. I don't draw that way. I tend to just kind of pick a surface and then that's my measurement. So I'm looking at the top of the head, and then I'm looking for the eye, which is somewhere about the front third, maybe just past half. So I'm thinking about the eye being somewhere in here. And I'm looking for the top of the beak. And I talk about this in the bullfrog course. I'm just talking through how I'm seeing right now, is I'm looking at the top of the beak being at the top of the eye. So I'm mindful of that. And I'm going to, I know there's a little ridge there, so I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. And we'll worry about the feather coming down off the eye a bit later on. And, the mouth ends at about the middle of the eye. So I'm going to be mindful of that point in time, or in space, I should say. And this is an interesting challenge, this one, because it's a bit offset. So, we've got the beak. I feel like I need to go a little bit like that, maybe. And maybe bring the beak up a little bit more. I'm breaking myself right off my sketch pad here. So then we're going to come down to a nice tidy point here. I'm just going to lift off this graphite, because that's just going to bother me there. And, we have to deal with the idea that this is the mouth going down like that. And we've got the tongue. I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. Just kind of want to get to this eye and the beak. So, and I want to get that nostril right. So the nostril kind of ends at the point where this feather comes down. So I'm going to start it there, and it kind of goes up at a bit of an angle. And what's interesting about this beak, I'm going to switch pencils, is it's got like, it's lighter on the top and it's darker on the bottom. So I'm going to go really dark down here. And I'm going to be a little bit lighter on the top, dark down here. And you can see there's like a little thing in there. So I want to make sure that I preserve that. That gives us a sense of depth. And you can see just tapping that white back a little bit. So we can see that a little bit in the middle. So that's the nostril. And then this little line I've got to be mindful of as it comes down right beside the nostril, and then down like that. So this gives us a chance to work on this part of the beak. We'll come back to that in a minute. I always like to do the animal eyes first. So we're trying to, the point of this is not necessarily drawing animal eyes, it's trying to get that glassy look to it. So you can go nice and dark around the sides once you feel that you're ready to jump in with that. And we can cut the eye off because we've got this nice little bit of feather. We're going to extend that back here. And just going to knock down the white here. We've got a little bit of an edge that I forgot about there, the little bit of a yellow. So I'm just going to lift that off again. And sometimes the most important part of the eyes is nothing to do with the eye. It's getting the little textures and the values around the eyes. So for this, I want to make sure that I preserve that little edge, and then it goes away at the bottom so I can come in there. Okay, and then we're going to put the pupil forward a little bit. Now, what's really interesting about the reflections and getting the glassiness is making sure that it transitions all parts of the eye. If you just put that highlight above the pupil, it's going to look weird and look odd. In this case, we've got this, it's almost like the bird is seeing a tree in the background. And so, we want to, with every eye, you kind of want to start from the pupil and just drag these little tiny lines out. And that helps to kind of establish the eye itself. And so that's really easy to do. You can just keep going around in a circle and just drag those little lines out. And then I'm going to go back in here, and I can then bring in a little bit. I'm not pushing too hard here. And I'm just trying to bring a little bit of darkness. Just so I get a sense of, did I get the pupil right, right? And now I'm going to take a stab now and just really, not hard, but I'm going to really add my dark now here, down here. And then what I'm also going to do is go from probably like mid part of the eye and go around this way and bring those lines over and bring them back. I want to make sure that the lines respect that line we have in the eye. And now for things like this, we've got a lot of feathers to deal with, so we need to make sure that we kind of save the yellow that's there. And with feathers, you're not going to be drawing a feather necessarily, like a normal feather where you've got the bits like that. You're trying to draw as little as you need to for people to perceive what you want them to with regard to the feathers and the shapes. And, up here, we're not really seeing feathers. It almost looks like hair, but because this animal has a beak, we know they're feathers and not hairs themselves, right? So I'm not going to be going through and worrying about that. And even if I'm up here and I'm doing some of these feathers, I'm not necessarily would be doing the feathers. I would be coming in like that. And some of these are pointed, so I may do points like that as well. But once again, I'm trying to, this is much lighter up here, so I would tend to go darker as I get down into this area. And in order to kind of push the eye back, I think I may go a little bit darker here. And I'm just adding really tiny lines in here just because we want to see that it's an eye. If you had a larger version of the eye, because I think I see a tree there, you could even bring in a little bit of a tree. But once again, you have to be concerned about the values here. I saw somebody ask a question and I saw Bethan answered. Values can get really tricky with pencil because you can't just come in with, water down a Payne's gray and fix your problem. You've got to kind of be very careful that if I go dark here and if I go and try to bring in the tree here, is the tree going to be darker than down here? No, it has to be a little bit lighter. So it's just being mindful of, and that's why I say the pencil really teaches you how to kind of manage your values and kind of focusing on those darks and lights early on. And that's why I like doing the eyes, because the eyes now set the stage for the rest of it. So even with something like this, we've got, I can come in here really easily here because this is a yellow. So I'm going to come in, and if you want to, you can take one of these images and just apply a black and white filter if that's easier to kind of get started with this. But if I want to, I can kill this down a little bit. And there we go. So now we've got a little bit less white where it's yellow. And I don't want to go too much there. And so when we're up in the beak, what I'm mindful of here is that this area is a little bit lighter, and for the beak to have that kind of texture, I mean, you got to think about the eagles and what they eat, right? And all the food and everything they've probably fighting with other eagles cause all these little scars. So we got to make sure that we kind of show that part of the story. And so I'm going to go really dark here because we can. I'm confident with where that tip of the beak is. And then I can come up here. And what I can do is a few things. I can I'm trying to be mindful about the texture, right? Which way is the texture going? I'm going to just change my screen here. You won't see anything, but I'm changing things around for me. Is there are lines that kind of go down this way. And so when you're shading or when you're adding this kind of texture, you want to be mindful of where kind of the rings of growth, right? Like down here, it's less prominent, but up here, it's almost like you can see the lines moving this way. And so it's always good to kind of shade or color dealing with those directions. Down here, it's a little bit less of a concern. But it's all I'm doing right now. All I'm thinking about is I need to get some more graphite down here so I can come in with my smudging tool and give it a good smudge, which I will do. And then if I want to, I can come in later and bring some highlights back. And I'm not pushing too hard here. I'm just trying to spread out some of the graphite. And up here, I want to be light. So I'm actually going to use the smudging tool to kind of do that.
Hello, sweetie.
And for something like that line, what I can do is draw on either side of it and preserve that line. Okay, so I'm mindful of time. I don't know if I kind of want to get to another piece so that everyone has a chance to try different things. But I don't know if there's a preference of if we were to choose one more thing, what is there a preference in what we should take a stab at? I'm gonna.
Sweetie. Hello, Snow.
We don't have anyone typing in what they'd like to see. If you are
Okay.
taking a look at Mike's references, you can indicate what you'd like to do. If everyone could remember to keep their mute on, that would be really wonderful too.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure I'm not the sweetie. You'll know who you are now. Okay, the morel mushroom. You could do that. So something like the morel, I've drawn morels a few times, and they are so wonderful to eat. With something like this, you've got to be careful. So I'm going to really rough this in. So if I'm looking at the morel, it's got this really, and I'm being really light on the pencil here, but I'm just trying to get a sense of, you know, if it's something like this, it's got a bit of a ragged edge. Beautiful fruit. Go down this way. And then all my drawings kind of start with this, where I'm kind of like loose. I may not do the whole drawing. I may just focus on one part of it. Here's a piece I just started. I'm just going to bounce around here a little bit, but I'm doing a little elephant scene and I haven't drawn anything else except the elephant yet. So sometimes, a lot of the time, I don't necessarily draw the whole scene. And that kind of catches me out sometimes, because then you end up running out of paper or the composition looks odd. So for something like the morel, it's a little bit more challenging here because you've got, you know, basically the whole outer edge is white. And when you're looking at the inside textures, you're going to notice that, you know, for some, so let's do a segment up at the top here. Yeah, I didn't mean to call somebody up, but it's all good. So, you know, you can come in and just be real soft with where you want things to be. And all we're doing is we're dealing with the shadows here. We're just trying to place the shadows. But if I come down into, let's say, I'm just going to go arbitrarily here. You want to make sure that if you're doing something like this, is being mindful of how tight that line is. You know, it's not, I'm going to go to a much larger scale up here. you're not drawing the dark bits like this, right? And having a nice sharp line. You're trying to be kind of intentional and soft with something like a more of a gradual line where maybe you're going to go a little bit darker like that. And that gives you a much better sense of depth, because the depth is kind of the transition to darkness. And so sometimes that transition is really clean, like something like the pupil of the eagle, and the outer ridge here, and something like the nostril. But even with the nostril, I was more mindful to be lighter on the top and darker on the bottom. And just to see, once again, I'm just looking at that thinking, I should be a little bit darker there. So up in here in the morel, I'm trying to think about, okay, let's say this is, I'm going to be really light with my pencil here. I'm going to draw this kind of shape right here in the middle of the morel. And, this vein bit, or I don't even know what you would call it, but this raised bit goes all the way down, and it almost looks like an ear. But I'm going to lift off some of that, and I want to be kind of thoughtful about this. I think this little bit in the middle is really interesting because you've got kind of these two little bits of the morel, and then right where they meet, is really dark. So I'm just going to take a stab at that and say that's really dark. And I'm fine with it being really dark there because it starts to smooth out as it comes up. So I'm going to be, and when I'm doing this kind of thing, I'm not trying to be up and down like that. I'm doing little circles because I don't want to see my lines. So I'm being a little bit. And if I wanted to make it even softer, I could come in with my smudging tool. This one has a better point on it right now. And I can just, there's a couple ways to do this. You can bring, so if you're in this situation where you've got a transition here and you want this to be deeper into the paper because it's darker, you can either pull the graphite up or you can push it down. If you push it down, you want to make sure that you clean your tortillon first. And so you can, I don't have anything with me, but I'm going to wipe it on the Q-tip here. I can pull off some of the graphite, and then what I can do is I can work from the top down. Not too much because you're building up graphite right now, and then maybe what I want to do is lift it off again, just on the top. And then I can go darker again if I wanted. And I'm trying to do this without cramming the graphite into the tooth of the paper. Because, and especially with graphite, there's so many drawings I've done where it's like, I'm not enjoying this. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't like it. It's not fun. But you just have to stick with it, and eventually the image will come around, and you'll find a place where it clicks with you. So I don't want you to give up when you're doing this kind of thing. And even with this one, so I'm going to go, this is darker on the top edge of this part of the morel. And then when I come down, we're darker here. And this piece is interesting because it's light here, but it's a bit darker here. And then what I'm going to do is this part is white, right? So I'm going to just do that, just so I can see that line. And then what I can do is I want to go a little bit darker here, but this part of the ridge is below this part. So this really needs to be the white of the paper. And this one needs to be a little bit darker. So, but it has to be lighter than this. So I'm darkening this again. And when you do this enough, you start to get a sense of, this is, I need to be, 10% dark here. And this is a 30%, or this dark is the same as this dark. And so you get a sense of that. And this is why I say, like, when you start doing this enough, this will start playing into your watercolor work, acrylic, any other kind of work that you do. you'll get a sense of the darks and the shadows and the textures, because everything is flat to begin with, and then it's just by adding graphite, and all you're doing with the graphite is you're pushing in the shadows. So just think about, if you can try and see what you're going to draw in front of you, all you're trying to do is push the bits in so that the ones facing you are taller. In most cases, that's what it's like. If you're drawing, some of these objects are a little bit more challenging, but even if you're doing like a polar bear and you're drawing its fur, polar bears have black skin, so you're trying to highlight the furs, but really what you're doing is you're drawing the shadows. You're not drawing the fur itself, and that becomes a little bit more challenging. I would not recommend a polar bear if you're just starting out drawing. It's certainly very challenging. And something like this as well. I'm just going to come down and be aggressive about that. And if you wanted to, you can go around and, just start bringing in more of these elements here. And you can always take away graphite as long as you're not pushing too hard on this.
So I see you're kind of drawing with your smudging tool right now, so because it's got some remnant graphite on the end, is that right?
Exactly. And because I'm not pushing hard, I can, if, I just put this piece in here, if I wanted to remove this segment on the very top, I can just drag or even tap my blue tack and I can almost completely remove it. So it's a really great way if you wanted to quickly kind of just, if I want to preserve that. And I'm not even looking at the photo at this point, but I'm just getting a sense of, or maybe I am now, providing these little ribs. It's a really easy way to come in and do that. And these ribs are going to be tighter because you're going over the top. So I'm going to make a little shorter ones here. And then you can quickly come in afterwards with your pencil, and then you can just start doing a little bit more. And the nice thing I like about the graph gear, this is a weird thing to say, but I like it because you can roll it. Normally what happens is you get a bit of a point on the graphite, and I remember where the point is. So sometimes like this, like I can see that this bottom edge here, my pencil is flat. So I'm going to come in with that when I'm in this area. But if I'm up here, I just rotated my pencil because I know that this point here is much sharper. And when you start to manage the tip of your pencil, then you can quickly kind of deploy it when you need it. And the reason I like the graph gear is I can hold this in any configuration and the clip doesn't hurt. It doesn't get in my way. The thing I don't like about the mono eraser is that this bothers me, this little clippy thing at the back. And sometimes I can't get it to where I want it to be because when you turn, I don't know if you can see that. So if I turn the black end, the eraser moves. So if I want this point the way it is now, I kind of got to get under the clip. So I started hating this just for that reason. And what you can do as well is if you really want a sharp tip here, take an X-Acto knife and cut the tip flat off. Like don't cut it at an angle, cut it straight and use one of those edges. You can get a really nice tip on that. You can also use something like this electric eraser, which is quite handy too, but I only use that for larger pieces. Okay. And let's see. So if we wanted to consider some of the, these are much softer down here. It's a matter of textures. So once again, we can use a smudging tool for that. You can throw a little bit of graphite on the paper. If you want to use like a Q-tip, it's easy enough to do that. What I would avoid doing, and it really, you'll notice it once you see it, and you can't unsee it, and that is don't touch the paper with your fingers. Don't spread the graphite with your fingers because you're just introducing oil, and oil reacts differently, and you're going to end up with a mess. So if you're trying to move graphite around, just always use something that has no oil or nothing or anything like that on it. Now, if I'm going to try this graphite powder, because It's kind of a fun thing to play with. And so I can come in here because down here is white, right? So what I can do, this is a fairly full container, so I'm trying to be careful here, but I can come in with graphite powder and I can apply a little bit around the mushroom to help make that base stand out. And because it's really just graphite powder, it's really easy to lift and to adjust. And you can, I could go up the whole side here. I'm making a mess of things here, but you could go up the whole side because maybe you want it to stand out a little bit more. And, depending on the brush that you use and the technique, you can just wipe it through almost like working like a little bit like watercolor. And then if I'm going to put the lid on this because I always worry about knocking it over. You can come in then with your blue tack or your kneadable eraser, and you can just, I felt like I went too dark here, so I can just quickly come in and just rub it on the graphite, and it'll pull up the graphite quite easily. And maybe I want to, then on top of this, maybe just add some pieces of grass. Maybe some of the grass is lighter than the background, so I would just take my kneadable eraser, just drag it down.
Mike, is there any sort of special brush you use for the powder application? Is it particularly fluffy or
cheap? So you don't want to accidentally use like your watercolor brush. So I bought this and it's all beat up, but it doesn't really matter. I don't think it matters. You don't want something too soft. You want something that's going to be able to hold it. This is a bit too large for something like this, but it depends on the scale of your drawings. I'm not a huge fan of graphite powder. I don't use it a lot. I used it on some of my larger pieces, but you can see it's already getting all over the paper. Yeah, I used an awful one. I shouldn't say awful because people may like this one. I'll turn it over so you can see the name. But I didn't want to accidentally use it with any of my other work.
So the benefit of graphite powder is that you can cover a big area in one go, is that right?
Yeah, and you don't have to, because if I wanted to do this normally, I would have to come in with something like this, which is fine, but you can see like even doing this compared to this, you can see how the tooth of the paper appears versus that. I could kill that a little bit by coming in with the tortillon, but you're still going to see it, right? And this is a much more delicate look. So if you wanted to surround an image with some graphite, that's a really great way to do it. But I'd say it's really messy, so I really encourage you to be careful with. I'm just trying to find which pencil I was using. And the thing is, I carry like 3 of each pencil because I'm just worried about one not working. The graphite, the graph gears, you do have to clean every so often, and so that's a bit of a challenge sometimes. How much time do we have, Bethan?
Well, it's about 5 past the hour now, so whatever you feel, Mike. We can we didn't specify a time, so we're gonna follow you.
So like I would encourage people to try the snapping turtle. I can show you the version I did and just talk through what was some kind of the interesting challenges in that. I hope it's in this book. So there's an early version of the eagle. It's a slightly different pose, but this was 3 years ago. So, but I'm going to try and find in here. And so see, there's an example of not drawing feathers. Let me lift this up a bit. He's not drawing feathers, but it's a bird. right? So there's the snapping turtle.
There's incredible texture variety on the turtle, isn't there?
Yeah, that's why I really enjoyed doing this. And the story with this turtle is that image you see is a still from a GoPro camera that I had over a dock. So we were camping and I had the GoPro camera, trouble saying that today, GoPro camera in the water on a stick because there was a bass, like a fish that was down there. So I was kind of capturing that image. And then I look up and I'm there with my daughter and she's like, what is that? And I saw this huge snapping turtle, like its carapace, its shell was about 18 inches. And it was swimming towards the bass because it was going to eat it. And so I rotate the camera and I caught it coming in and then swimming out. So this is a capture from a video of that whole activity. And I just love them because they're so prehistoric. So if you wanted to practice textures, you've got, the equivalent of the eagle beak here. The eye has these really interesting kind of indentations. It's almost like it's cut into the eye. So this idea of adding, being really dark here, but then smoothing this out as you get to those edges. And then you've got these little bits down here. And when I was drawing those, all I'm doing is drawing a bunch of circles like that. And I'm just filling it around them. And, being intentional about those being darker and being mindful that the light is kind of coming down from the top. So if this is one of those kind of nodules, I'm going to be a little bit lighter here and then making sure that I get a bit darker down here, but you can see if we have darkness around that and we try and keep the top white, you can quickly see that you've got those top edges sitting up proper, and we've got the bottom edges darker, and that's what I tried to do in through here. I made this darker because it's pushing in. We've got that kind of, I don't know what part of the turtle that is. Its cheek is much darker, so I just simply went in with a pencil and just applied more pencil here. And once again, tried to keep it a little bit lighter on the top. And this was a lot of fun to do.
How long does a very detailed drawing like that take you, Mike?
This was about, I don't remember, so I'm going to say like an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe.
Oh,
Like
wow.
most of the pieces in here are really not very long. I would recommend, like I was going to do a dragonfly today. I think that would have been fun, but that's a real challenging bit when it comes to texture because their wings are really problematic. And so if you're ever going to do a dragonfly, I saw somebody talking about these tortillon, these blenders, that's going to save you so much time on the wings because it gives you the sense of a slight bit of opacity to the wing by just drawing the little lines and then going over it with the tortillon. You can see kind of gives you this sense that it is blocking some of the light.
When you're working, do you find yourself dropping into a bit of a meditation state where you're not thinking about anything except values and graphite?
Absolutely. I will do something like this one I did in a park. And so I think I maybe have talked about this. I was going to draw the seagulls, but I was more interested in the texture of the rock. And so I ended up spending a lot more time on these rocks. And Christelle will know where this is. This is Strathcona Park in Ottawa. And people pile these rocks in these wonderful sculptures. So I ended up spending more time drawing the texture of the rock. And it's the same with animals. I'm going to try and find one here that's on a like something like this frog. Don't marginalize the importance of the texture here, because that sometimes will set off the subject. And I end up spending, like I probably spent half the time just on this bit here relative to the frog itself, because the textures here really, like this isn't like a bullfrog. Like doing this is fairly straightforward. And in this case, I went around and I do these like kind of crazy eights, and that kind of gives you that texture. And then I went over it with a blender. And so you may not see it, but there's little white dots, and that's how I achieve that, is just going back and forth, doing crazy eights back and forth, and then went over it with a blender. And then that ends up popping these little white bits out. but don't marginalize this. This is really great practice if you're doing things like bark and lichen. Lichen is really like, you will pull your hair out. I mean, can you tell? When you try and do something like lichen, because it's got so much kind of intricate detail to it, but when you get it right, it really feels special. So it's not just about the flower or the animal, it's what they're on. You know, there's another mushroom. This was a little bit, this was super quick, but trying to find, I thought I had one on a branch here, just a sec. See, I haven't finished this one. So this is, I spent a little bit more time on this. I don't know what these painted turtles do, but they stick their feet out and they're just sitting on a log. It's like flash dance or something. I don't know what goes on, but they, I haven't finished this yet because you can see this looks really flat, right? Like and I'm critical of myself here, but these white edges need to stand out, but this isn't dark enough. So I've got to come in here a little bit darker and then soften it up as I get further out from those edges. And then that will give it the sense that this part of the turtle's shell is closer to you. So, and obviously there's some light on the top here, so I've got to go lighter, but I just haven't finished this. I'm not sure if I will, but and once again, I got caught up here. I'm thinking, oh, I need to do the, because he's on a piece of wood, he or she, and I just haven't finished that yet. But I think I have any other. So there's the bullfrog test. You know, doing something like a tiger hair is really hard. So I got to this point, it's like, I think I'm going to do this differently. I just stopped because hair could be really challenging. You know, once again, I spent so much time here with regard to texture as well, and trying to get the lashes and trying to get the hair right. And if you ever want to do something that's really challenging, do an animal nose, like especially something like a bear, trying to get the little kind of marks on its nose. That's a really fun example. Like I think I did one, I think I've got it in here. I did an example of a bunch of eyes, which is a fun thing to try. But I really want to do noses, like a dog nose and a goat and a bear. And because they're just, it's, this kind of experience is good. Don't always think about finishing. See, there's the lichen. Sorry, all over the place here. Like choose body parts and focus on those elements. And I know that a lot of us are nature journaling and doing this outside and doing it quickly. And maybe I need to do a separate kind of session at some point in time about how to sketch quickly and trying to do texture. But when I am nature journaling, I will do some out in the field and then I'll come back and finish it off. And so it's a bit of a trade-off between, because I'm an urban sketcher as well. And I do fine art pieces, so it's a real mix. But I really think we could all benefit from more drawing, and depth is so important in trying to ensure that we are we're pushing the darks back and we're bringing the lights up. Because some people, the composition is perfect and the proportions are fine, the composition's great, but they just didn't go dark enough, so it looks really, really flat. And texture's really just, that's all it's about. And it's just a matter of spending time. And it's not going, like, even with these eyes, I didn't go really, really black here first. You just kind of layer it on and layer it on, and just making sure that you go dark where it has to be dark. Like, don't be scared of it. And if you're not doing it with an HB pencil, then get a 2B. And even if you just get a normal wooden pencil, that's fine. But make sure you get a 2B, because you can do so much with it. And then you don't have to carry around like 6 pencils. And that's, I did a workshop with Mike Sibley a few years ago. It was a 3-day workshop. And that was the big takeaway from that, is he really just used 1 pencil, sometimes 2. Like, he just used a 2B pencil. Sometimes he use a 4B, but that was it. And before that, I had all the pencils. Like, I was like, okay, here's an 8B thing I've got to do. And oh, I've got to come in here. So I'm not sure I'm going to do yet. So I'm going to use a 4H because it's really light. It doesn't always work. And the other bit maybe I'll show quickly is, I don't know if anyone's used indenting tools. I'm sure some of you have, but maybe I'll just show you quickly that experience. And I bought this little set from, you can buy these on Amazon. That's where I bought this. And the way this works is, if let's say there's white feathers here that especially when you're doing whiskers on a cat, this is a really great way to do it, is that you apply pressure on the paper. And once again, you have to be mindful that if I'm pushing into the paper and then I'm lifting out, where I'm lifting out is going to be narrower. So with a cat, with the hairs that are growing down like this, I'm going to be going hard here and then lifting out, hard here and lifting out. And then I could even go off at an angle if I wanted to, hard here and lifting out. And this is where you're confident that this is where you want to do the lines, because once you do this, you're stuck. So then when I come with the graphite, my lines are there. And so that's a really great way to bring texture. And I've had this happen accidentally where, you end up with something on the backside of a page and it leaves an indent on your paper, and it's like, no. And then you have to spend all your time trying to fill in that little piece, and it's impossible to do. You can do it, but if you're doing things like white whiskers or anything that's white and thin like that, one of these indenting tools is just priceless.
Does it work the same on any paper? Does it work on thin paper as well?
Yes. Yeah. So if I go to, like this is the moleskin paper I was talking about. And this is the thing, is these pieces fall out. But anyways, yeah, so I can do the same thing here. Let's say I'm going to go fat to thin this way. And come in with, there we go.
That's genius. I love that technique.
And then what you can do if you wanted to as well is you can add a little bit of shadow underneath, right? And if you're really good at kind of coming in underneath, you can add shadow on top of shadow. So now that that piece is on top of this one, and I'm going to put this one on top of that one. I'll put this one on top of that one. So now we can see that there's a little bit more texture on it. And this may not work for whiskers, but for something like twigs on the ground or something like that, now you've got that opportunity. And then if I wanted to, maybe this piece is taller, I could add the shadow a little bit further down. And that gives us the impression that one's even taller than the others.
That's a wonderful way to quickly add texture and also lines that might be going every which way, which is really hard to do when you've had a thin, fine line.
Yes. The one of the pieces I was going to add here was a purple coneflower, echinacea, and that is such a challenge to draw because there's so much darkness in the flower itself, but there's a geometric pattern with the little spiky bits. See my technical science terms? But you have to kind of respect the geometry, which is really, really challenging, right? So I did a picture for my daughter of two monarchs, and you'll see that in the etcher course as kind of the teaser for the one this fall. I'm not doing the butterflies. But I drew the purple coneflower 3 times. Drew it, no, erase it, drew it, erase it. It was really hard to get that right. So you can't use this for that, but sometimes those patterns are really frustrating. Something like the grapes, I think, is a really fun exercise. The reason I included the grapes into the series of 8 images is because it's going to be the most subtle. So if you just want to relax on something, just start with drawing a few of the grapes together and then slowly apply more graphite. And then if you really wanted to challenge yourself, you could do the same thing in watercolor. I did this piece in watercolor last year, and I really loved drawing the grapes. And so I would recommend, that's a really kind of gentle exercise about just because there's so much when we look at the grapes, and I'll just show you the grapes here quickly. You can see that if we broke this down into a black and white image, there'd be so many values here that you're going to have the struggle of what's the darkest. And is the grape on the top left the same as the one at the very top. Well, they're close, but I would say that the one on the top has a bit more a darker value as you move down halfway past the equator. And so it's this kind of balancing act of where do I put the darks, where do I put the darker? And for something like this, you kind of want to find where's the darkest bit. Well, it's that kind of broken grape that looks eaten. Right below that, I think, is the darkest part of this image. And then I would work out from there, understanding that the highlights are going to be the whitest, but that grape right smack and dab in the middle, that top edge is probably the second lightest value. And so it's kind of just balancing that act of what do you do?
Thank you so much, Mike. You're truly a master of texture and graphite. It's been amazing to learn from you. I wonder if there's any last minute questions that anyone wants to ask. In color pencils drawing, I have been thinking that texture achieved a bit by more line patterns. What do you think?
So actually this book, is it this book? Yeah. So I've got colored pencil in here. Do you want to show you some of that? So colored pencil is a little bit more exciting because you can use texture for that. Let me just move some. I'm sorry, this is loud. For something like this Cecropia moth, you can use kind of the way you use the pencil a little bit more to kind of get the speckled pattern, kind of the what do they call them on the wings of moths and butterflies, the scales. For this, it was much more challenging because you put down like almost like a light ochre, and then you come in with a burnt umber on top and just pointillize it, right? But I really like working with, and this is why I say it's the values thing, right? You add the shadow under the Cecropia moths here, and now they look like they're sitting on top of the paper. And I don't know if I have other, oh yeah, so there's dragonflies and mergansers. So these are the ones that that emerged. This was an older drawing, but these are the mergansers that come and nest with us. So once again, you know, just being really quick, this is all colored pencil except for the ink in here. And once you learn the values, even though I'm using, you know, a dark umber and a black in here, you start to kind of understand that, you know, the bottom part of the head here is sitting a little bit lower and the light's coming down from the top. So I'm going to just smudge out a little bit, and that gives that sense of roundness to this crown or whatever you call it on the top of the merganser. When you start spending time with pencil, I found it much easier to go to colored pencil. And once I liberated myself from watercolor wanting to do its own thing, I found that the graphite stuff that I was doing was informing me, and I was just choosing not to see it. And now that I've embraced it, it really has meant a lot to me. I was talking to Roseanne, and I said it's like watercolor's a dance, and sometimes it's rock and roll, and sometimes it's flamenco. Like it's all over the place, and that's what I find exciting and intimidating about watercolor. But with graphite, it's always the same, and it's a really great value practice, even if you are spending 90% of your time watercolor.
I love how you've taught us that focusing on values can be a skill that sort of embeds in you as an artist, and you take it into whatever medium. And when I started watercolor, very much so, the problem of just having everything a little bit too light was my issue. And when you realize that you just need to push the darks to make it pop out, I think that's a really valuable lesson. And
thanks, Christelle. I'm not seeing all the comments, but I saw Christelle. Christelle's like, we've sketched together here in Ottawa, and Christelle's an amazing artist. Because Brooke is here, I'm going to say thank you, Brooke, because if it wasn't for Brooke, I wouldn't have applied for a Wild Wonder. And so the reason I'm speaking at Wild Wonder this fall is because of Brooke. She's been an amazing supporter and amazing artist as well. I think there's some foundational values. I always think I've interviewed some artists who say you shouldn't draw. If you wanted to oil paint, forget drawing. And I struggle with that, because I think being able to draw and use graphite is important. I think that like even when I like you can see this tiger over my shoulder, that's an acrylic piece I'm working on. That's 2 foot by 3 foot. That's my first acrylic piece, but I feel like everything I've done with graphite has led me to that in the sense that I've been able to fairly easily sort out the textures and the darks and the lights and the values. I just have to understand the colors a little bit more and the brush. And so I think having all of that is, it all leads us to the next thing. And I think the work that you're doing, Bethan, with this and engaging people and exposing some of us to stuff that we haven't seen before is so valuable. And that's what I found with the podcast myself and interviewing these people is I'm hearing stuff I've not tried before. And if it wasn't for the people I've spoken to, I wouldn't be where I am in my journey. And I'm thankful that there's people like you and so many people in this room that are trying to further themselves along. And you know, we're always told that you need to find your artistic voice and you need to focus and you need to niche down. And sometimes that's not what we need. We haven't found what we need yet. And it's the journey. Like this tiger's, sure, it'll be a nice piece maybe when it's done, but the journey there, it's been years in the making. And that's what I value more than the piece itself. So I think we just have to remember that this is all a journey. We're in it together and it's fun. And I'm just so thankful that you reached out to me, Bethan. I wish I could have organized something a little bit more in a week, but I'm so glad to be
Yes,
here.
I didn't give you much warning, and I very much appreciate you just jumping in and helping us understand and explore texture. Thank you, Mike. It's been amazing to learn from you. It's been really wonderful, and there's a lot of love for you in the chat, which I'll send you later.
And people are asking about Roseanne's podcast. So she's her episode's going to be out June 26th. And I haven't recorded the one that's coming out yet, but it's a wonderful artist that Roseanne actually happens to mention in the podcast, which was crazy. But he's an artist out of Montreal, and he's going to be the next episode, which comes out on June 12th. So every 2 weeks.
Thank you. Amazing. And congratulations again for 100 episodes. It's a huge milestone. Big time in the life of a podcaster.
You were part of that, so thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you everyone for coming along today. Our next live session is with Karina, who is also in Canada. That's going to be, I'm not going to say the details because I can't remember, but they're on the website. And we appreciate you all. Thank you so much for coming along, and especially Mike, thank you so much for diving in and teaching us all about texture.
Thank you, everyone.
Take
care.
Take care. See you later.